Hello and welcome. Today we're starting an important conversation about a topic that deeply affects many families: understanding trauma in neurodivergent children. We'll explore how trauma can impact a child's development, relationships, and mental health. For autistic children, trauma often intertwines with their sensory sensitivities, communication differences, and unique ways of processing the world. This can make recognizing and supporting them a real challenge. Parents and caregivers are on the front lines, playing a vital role in identifying and responding to trauma in a way that puts safety, connection, and emotional validation first. Autistic children can experience trauma from events that are stressful for anyone, but also from situations that are uniquely difficult for them, like sensory overload, social exclusion, or rigid school environments. Understanding this connection between autism and trauma is the first step toward providing effective support, preventing further harm, and nurturing resilience. So, what exactly is trauma? It's broadly defined as an experience or a series of experiences that overwhelms a person's ability to cope and threatens their sense of safety or well-being. Trauma can be a single major event, or it can be chronic, resulting from repeated exposure to stress over time. The key thing to remember is that trauma is subjective. It's defined by the individual's personal experience, not by how severe an event might seem to someone else. Trauma has a real physiological impact, altering the nervous system, stress responses, and our ability to regulate emotions. It also carries cognitive and emotional consequences, affecting attention, memory, self-perception, and social-emotional growth. For autistic children, these effects can be amplified or even hidden because their unique ways of communicating, recognizing emotions, and processing sensory information can change how trauma is expressed and understood. Why might autistic children be more vulnerable to trauma? There are several reasons. First, their sensory sensitivities can make everyday environments like classrooms or public spaces feel overwhelming and distressing. This constant overstimulation can trigger a trauma-like physiological response, leading to heightened fear, anxiety, or shutdown behaviors. If this sensory-triggered stress is persistent and unsupported, it can become a form of chronic trauma. Next, differences in communication and social interaction play a huge role. Difficulty expressing emotions or articulating distress can stop autistic children from asking for help. When their behaviors are misinterpreted by others, it can lead to negative feedback, exclusion, or even punishment, which only reinforces the trauma. Social isolation and bullying can have a devastating impact, as they may struggle to find and access the social support they need. Executive function challenges also contribute. Difficulties with planning, flexibility, and problem-solving can make it harder to navigate stressful situations. An inability to anticipate or adapt to changes can worsen the impact of negative experiences, creating a buildup of what's known as cumulative trauma. Finally, there's a condition called alexithymia, which is common in autism. It means having difficulty identifying and describing one's own emotions. This can mask trauma symptoms, as a child might show behavioral or physiological signs of trauma, like aggression, withdrawal, or repetitive behaviors, without being able to verbally express what they're feeling. Recognizing trauma in autistic children requires a keen eye because it often looks different than it does in their neurotypical peers. Caregivers should watch for certain behavioral indicators, like an increase in meltdowns or shutdowns, a regression in skills they had previously mastered, or a new avoidance of places they once felt safe. You might also see heightened irritability, aggression, or self-injurious behaviors. Emotionally and physiologically, you might notice persistent anxiety or hypervigilance, sleep disturbances and nightmares, or physical complaints like stomach aches and headaches. Rapid mood changes or difficulty calming down can also be signs. Cognitively and socially, look for difficulty concentrating, withdrawal from friends and family, or a heightened sensitivity to social judgment. You may also see an increase in repetitive or ritualistic behaviors, which can be a way of coping with overwhelming feelings. It's so important for caregivers to learn to differentiate these trauma responses from typical autistic behaviors, while also recognizing that trauma can make existing challenges much more intense. Some of the most significant sources of trauma for autistic children are subtle and often overlooked by adults. Everyday sensory overload from bright lights, loud noises, and crowded spaces can cause overwhelming stress. When this happens day after day without support, it can create a state of chronic trauma. Peer exclusion or bullying, even brief negative interactions, can be experienced as traumatic due to a heightened sense of social vulnerability. And when a child's natural responses to stress, like stimming, meltdowns, or shutdowns, are met with punitive measures, it can inadvertently re-traumatize them. Even something as simple as an unexpected change in routine can be overwhelming and trigger a fear response. The key takeaways here are that trauma is subjective, autism can mask or amplify its effects, and behavior is a form of communication. Prevention and early support are absolutely critical. Now let's dive deeper into how autistic children process trauma. Because of their differences in sensory processing, emotional awareness, and cognitive style, trauma may be processed in intense, fragmented, or even delayed ways. This can lead to behaviors that seem confusing or disproportionate to the situation. For instance, a high sensitivity to sound or touch can amplify a perceived threat, making a minor noise feel as stressful as a major traumatic event. Alexithymia can lead to stress being internalized, showing up as physical symptoms or behavioral outbursts instead of words. And challenges with planning and flexibility can make it harder to cope, increasing the risk of becoming completely overwhelmed. Even memory works differently. An autistic child might focus on specific sensory details of an event, which can repeatedly trigger the traumatic memory. Certain risk factors can increase the likelihood and impact of trauma. Environmental stressors like inconsistent routines or sensory-intensive spaces are big ones. Interpersonal stress, such as harsh discipline or negative responses to their emotional needs, also plays a part. And individual factors, like having high cognitive awareness without the emotional tools to match, or co-occurring conditions like anxiety, can heighten vulnerability. This brings us to the concept of cumulative trauma, the buildup of stressors over time. For autistic children, repeated experiences of being misunderstood, excluded, or overwhelmed can accumulate, creating a chronic state of hyperarousal or emotional dysregulation. You might see this as frequent meltdowns, heightened anxiety, or avoidance of school and social situations. Cumulative trauma is sneaky because each individual event might seem minor, but together they erode a child's sense of safety, control, and trust. So how can we support them? It starts with establishing safety and predictability. Create structured daily routines, use visual schedules, and provide predictable transitions to reduce stress and anxiety. Next, validate their emotions and experiences, acknowledge their feelings, avoid minimizing their experience, and use co-regulation strategies to model a calm and safe response. This helps children feel understood and builds a foundation of trust. Sensory and environmental supports are also essential. Offer access to sensory tools like fidgets or weighted blankets, adjust their environment to minimize overwhelming stimuli, and provide breaks during challenging tasks. Supporting their sensory needs reduces physiological arousal and helps them engage with coping strategies. Communication is key. Use simple, clear language and avoid any words that blame or shame their behavior. Offering choices can increase their sense of control, which is incredibly important. This trauma-informed communication fosters emotional safety. Finally, collaborative support is non-negotiable. Engage with educators, therapists, and other professionals to ensure a consistent, unified approach. Sharing visual supports, routines, and coping strategies across all environments creates the predictability that is so critical for autistic children. The main message for caregivers is this: autistic children process trauma differently, cumulative stress is a real and significant factor, and early intervention is crucial. By creating an environment of safety, predictability, and validation, we lay the foundation for resilience and recovery. For many kids, school is a place to learn, make friends, and grow. But for autistic students, it can feel like a battlefield. This is what we call school trauma, psychological harm from constant fear, anxiety, or feeling unsafe in an educational setting. It's not usually one big event, but a slow burn of chronic stress from being excluded, overwhelmed by senses, misunderstood, or bullied. For autistic learners who thrive on routine and predictability, school can put their nervous systems into a constant state of survival mode. There's this invisible weight of having to be normal. Autistic children are often expected to act, communicate, and learn just like everyone else. Teachers, with the best intentions, might praise quiet compliance and punish visible distress, seeing it as defiance. But for an autistic student, things like stimming, avoiding eye contact, or needing a break aren't bad behavior. They're essential coping strategies to regulate an overwhelmed system. When these natural, self-soothing methods are forbidden, the child learns a painful lesson. Who I am is wrong. This internalized shame builds up over time, eroding their self-esteem and creating chronic trauma. Let's talk about some common triggers. First, sensory overload. Classrooms are a storm of stimuli, buzzing lights, constant chatter, chairs scraping on the floor. For autistic students with heightened senses, it's a daily assault. You might see them covering their ears, rocking back and forth, or suddenly shutting down. These are signs of distress. When these reactions are punished, the child learns their pain doesn't matter, which just reinforces the trauma. Then there's social exclusion and bullying. Autistic kids are bullied at alarmingly high rates, often for their social differences or communication styles. They might not pick up on sarcasm or manipulation, making them easy targets. Even after the bullying stops, the deep mistrust and constant state of alert can linger for years, leading to symptoms like nightmares and emotional detachment. Another huge pressure is masking. This is the exhausting effort to hide natural autistic traits to fit in. A student might force eye contact or suppress their urge to stim. They get praised for it. "You're behaving so well." But the cost is immense. They feel disconnected from their true selves, living in constant fear of being exposed. This long-term performance leads to burnout, anxiety, depression, and a greater vulnerability to trauma. Finally, there's disciplinary trauma. Traditional punishments like detention or isolation rooms can be terrifying for autistic students. When a meltdown, which is a neurological overload, is treated as bad behavior, the child is punished for something they can't control. Imagine a student screaming during a loud fire drill and being put in isolation. The next time an alarm goes off, their panic is even worse because now they also fear the punishment. It creates a vicious cycle where expressing distress leads to more distress. This kind of trauma isn't just in the mind. It reshapes the body and brain. The body stays on high alert, ready for danger. A child might freeze or go completely silent when overwhelmed. This isn't defiance, it's a protective shutdown. They might also have chronic headaches or stomach aches, which is the body's way of expressing emotional pain. This constant stress rewires the brain, making it harder to learn and connect with others. Sadly, a tragic cycle often begins. The child gets distressed, adults misinterpret it as misbehavior, and the punishment makes the fear worse. School becomes a place to survive, not to thrive. And when school is associated with fear, a child might start refusing to go. It's not them being difficult, it's a self-preservation instinct. A trauma-informed approach doesn't force attendance, but asks why, and works to restore a sense of safety. This brings us to the risk of PTSD. We often think of trauma as coming from a single catastrophic event. But for autistic individuals, it can build up from chronic exposure to distressing environments. Their brains process sensory and emotional information differently. Everyday stressors can feel like extreme threats. It's not that they're fragile. Their threshold for distress is different. When the environment constantly pushes them past that threshold, their nervous system gets stuck in survival mode. This can lead to PTSD-like symptoms, even without a single big T trauma. Recognizing PTSD in autistic children is tricky. The symptoms, like avoiding certain places, being jumpy, or having a flat affect, can easily be mistaken for autism traits. This is called diagnostic overshadowing. A child's refusal to go to school might be seen as oppositional behavior instead of avoidance due to trauma. Repetitive talk about a distressing event might be dismissed as perseveration instead of an intrusive memory. As a result, the trauma goes untreated for years. Many autistic children also have difficulty identifying and describing their emotions. They might not say, "I'm scared," but their body will show it through stomach aches or meltdowns. Trauma gets stored in the body as sensory fragments, sights, sounds, and physical sensations. So we need to shift our focus from "what did the child say" to "what is the child's body communicating?" Often, what develops is not classic PTSD, but complex PTSD or CPTSD. This comes from prolonged stress, like years of masking, sensory overwhelm, and being punished for autistic behaviors. It affects a person's identity, their ability to regulate emotions, and their trust in others. It's the result of feeling unsafe for a very, very long time. Neurobiologically, think of the polyvagal theory. Our nervous system has a social engagement mode for calm connection and defensive modes like fight, flight, or freeze. In an environment that feels constantly threatening, an autistic child's system might get stuck in defense, never returning to a state of safety. This trauma directly impacts learning. A brain in survival mode can't focus on academics. You might see increased distractibility, memory gaps, or a sudden loss of skills. These are not signs of laziness. They are signs of a brain overwhelmed by trauma. That's why early identification is so critical. Unrecognized trauma can lead to severe mental health issues down the line. So what can we do? For caregivers, it starts with building safety. Observe behavioral shifts, listen for patterns in their distress, and validate their feelings, even if they can't name them. Saying, "It seems like school feels really unsafe for you right now," can make a world of difference. Advocate for trauma-informed support at school. For educators, it's about shifting your perspective. See behavior as communication. Instead of asking, "How do I stop this behavior?" ask, "What does this child need right now?" Replace punishment with sensory regulation options. The goal isn't to eliminate all stress, but to ensure that stress is followed by recovery and safety. Sometimes the system itself is the problem, with policies that prioritize control over compassion. We have to challenge that. We need to reframe the narrative. Autistic children experiencing trauma are not broken. They are adaptive. Their nervous systems learn to survive in environments that failed them. When we move from judgment to empathy, we can finally ask the right question. What happened to this child, and how can we help them feel safe again? By doing that, we can begin to create schools where every child has the chance to truly thrive. When we see a child who's upset or acting out, our first instinct is often to correct them. But what if that's the wrong approach? For autistic children who've experienced trauma, being corrected when they're distressed can just make them feel more scared and out of control. Today, we're diving into a different way of thinking, the trauma-informed approach. It's about shifting from correction to connection. Instead of asking, "What's wrong with this child?" we start asking, "What happened to this child, and what do they need to feel safe right now?" This simple change in perspective is huge. It means we see challenging behavior not as defiance, but as a signal of distress. It's a call for help from a nervous system that's completely overwhelmed. So we slow down, we prioritize safety over getting them to comply, and we see these tough moments as opportunities to connect and heal. So what does trauma-informed actually mean? It's not just one technique. It's a whole philosophy based on compassion and understanding the brain. It revolves around 6 key ideas. First, safety, making sure a child feels physically and emotionally secure. Second, trustworthiness, being reliable and clear in how we communicate. Then there's peer support, valuing shared experiences. Collaboration, where adults and children work together as equals. Empowerment, giving the child a sense of control and choice. And finally, being sensitive to their unique cultural and personal background. For autistic kids, these aren't just nice ideas. They are absolutely essential. They perfectly match the autistic need for predictability, clarity, and sensory safety. Let's talk about safety. The brain simply cannot learn or regulate itself if it doesn't feel safe. For autistic children, that feeling of safety can be fragile. A sudden loud noise, a confusing instruction, or an adult who's emotionally unpredictable can throw their whole system into survival mode, fight, flight, or freeze. In that state, you can't reason with them. Their brain isn't listening to logic. It's focused on escaping a perceived threat. So creating safety isn't just about being nice, it's a biological necessity. We can do this with consistent routines, using a soft tone of voice, respecting their personal space and sensory needs, and giving them choices whenever we can. Safety isn't about avoiding all conflict. It's about building trust, so they know that even when things get hard, the relationship is secure. This brings us to trust and predictability. Many autistic people rely on patterns and routines to make sense of a world that can feel chaotic. When adults are unpredictable, with shifting moods or inconsistent rules, it feels dangerous. Research shows that when adults are consistent, it actually reduces stress in children who've been through trauma. Trust is built in the small moments, keeping promises, giving warnings before transitions, and explaining changes before they happen. For example, instead of just saying, "Time to go," try saying, "In 5 minutes we'll leave. I'll give you a 2-minute reminder." This simple shift turns a potential threat into something manageable. Now let's talk about co-regulation. Autistic kids often need to borrow calm from someone else before they can find it in themselves. This is co-regulation. It's when a child's overwhelmed nervous system syncs up with a calm, regulated adult. As a caregiver, this means you have to stay grounded even when the child is falling apart. It might mean sitting quietly with them during a meltdown instead of demanding they make eye contact. You could say, "I'm right here, you're safe, take all the time you need." You can even try to gently match your breathing to theirs, modeling a sense of calm. This prioritizes connection over correction. When the adult stays steady, the child's body gets the message, "I'm not alone, I can be safe." Over time, these experiences teach the brain that stress can be followed by safety, which is the very essence of healing from trauma. Trauma takes away a person's sense of control. Many autistic kids, especially those in rigid systems, feel powerless. Trauma-informed care aims to give that power back by offering agency and choice. This doesn't mean no rules, it means structured choices within safe limits. For example, you could offer 2 options for a sensory break. Would you like the quiet corner or your headphones? Or you could ask before touching them, "Can I help with your shoes, or do you want to try first?" When kids feel like they have a say, their brains shift from a defensive mode to one of exploration. They learn their choices matter, which is the perfect antidote to the helplessness that trauma creates. The way we use our voice is incredibly powerful. For a child with both autism and trauma, the tone and rhythm of your speech can matter more than the words themselves. A sharp "stop" can feel like a physical threat, while a calm "let's pause" communicates safety. We need to use clear, respectful, and emotionally neutral language. So, instead of "what's wrong with you," try "what's happening for you right now." Instead of "you need to calm down," try "let's find what helps your body feel calm." And instead of dismissing their feelings with "you're fine," validate them by saying, "that was a lot. I can see it felt really big. This kind of gentle communication helps the autistic brain process social cues without feeling threatened. Healing relationships are a two-way street. Trauma-informed care means we don't fix kids. We walk alongside them. This builds trust and shows them their perspective is valued. You could ask something like, "You know your body best. What do you think would help when the classroom gets too noisy?" This not only validates their experience, but also teaches them to advocate for themselves, which is a crucial skill for life. This shifts our goal from managing behavior to supporting emotions. Rocking, pacing, or withdrawing aren't behaviors to be eliminated. They are signals of an unmet need. The framework is regulate, relate, and then reason. First, help calm their nervous system. Second, connect with empathy. And only then, once they feel safe, can you talk things through logically. This approach isn't just for therapy sessions. It's about our everyday interactions. The home and the classroom are where healing happens. It starts with being aware of how everything, from the lighting to your tone of voice, affects a child's nervous system. The environment itself can be a partner in regulation. Creating sensory-safe spaces with options like quiet corners, noise-canceling headphones, or natural lighting gives children tools to manage their own overwhelm. Predictable routines are the backbone of safety, but they need to be flexible. Using visual schedules that can be adjusted helps a child see and prepare for changes. Visual tools are also great for emotional literacy. Things like emotion thermometers or body maps can help a child identify and express feelings they might not have words for. And when you create these tools together, they become a shared language. Most importantly, remember that the most powerful tool is a regulated adult. Kids with trauma histories are constantly scanning us for signs of safety. If we're anxious or frustrated, they absorb that energy. It's okay to get overwhelmed ourselves, but the key is to model how to recover. Saying, "I got a bit overwhelmed, I'm going to take a breath," teaches them that big emotions are survivable. Finally, we need to reframe discipline as relationship repair. After a conflict, the most important thing is to show the child that the relationship is still secure. A simple, "That was hard for both of us. I still care about you," can make all the difference. Healing from trauma is a slow process, built on hundreds of these small, safe moments. The goal isn't to eliminate distress, but to help a child know they can get through it with support. When safety becomes predictable, the world starts to feel like a place where they can not only survive, but thrive. Have you ever thought about what school is really like for some kids? For many autistic children, it's not a place of growth, but a battleground for survival. Imagine a world where every fluorescent light buzzes like a swarm of angry bees, where the echo of a crowded cafeteria feels like a physical blow, and where every social interaction is a high-stakes test you never got the study guide for. This isn't an exaggeration. This is the daily reality for many neurodivergent students. When schools are designed for the average child, they often become environments of chronic stress for those who are different. This isn't about one big, bad event. It's trauma by 1,000 tiny cuts. It's the teacher's sigh of frustration, the laughter when you miss a social cue, the recess you lose because your body just needed to move. These moments build up. They create what's called a hidden curriculum of fear. It's the unspoken lesson that your way of being is wrong, that you don't belong, that you aren't safe. Instead of sparking curiosity, school starts to teach anxiety. Instead of building confidence, it creates self-doubt. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on school trauma, the hidden wounds that millions of autistic children carry, and more importantly, how we can begin to heal them. School trauma isn't what most people think. It's not usually a single dramatic event. It's chronic, relational, and deeply embedded in the everyday interactions of school life. It happens whenever a child's fundamental needs for safety, connection, and autonomy are consistently violated. For autistic students, this can happen in so many ways. Let's start with sensory overload. Fluorescent lights, loud bells, crowded hallways. These aren't just annoying. For a sensitive nervous system, they are a constant physical assault. This chronic overstimulation leads to fatigue, irritability, and eventually a conditioned fear response to the school building itself. Then there's the social landscape. Studies show autistic students are 4 times more likely to be bullied. Imagine going to a place every day where you feel like a target. This constant rejection undermines self-worth and creates hypervigilance, a key symptom of trauma where you're always scanning for the next threat. Now, add punitive behavior systems. Things like zero-tolerance policies or public behavior charts often punish children for being in distress. They confuse a nervous system meltdown with defiance. Being repeatedly removed from class or denied accommodations sends a powerful message of exclusion and shame, eroding any trust a child might have in the adults who are supposed to help them. And finally, there are the unseen micro-traumas. Being forced to make eye contact when it's painful, being told to stop stimming when it's your only way to self-regulate, being misunderstood day after day. These experiences might not leave visible scars, but they leave deep neurobiological imprints. This isn't just in their head. School trauma is physiological. When a child perceives a threat, whether it's social ridicule or sensory pain, their brain's alarm system, the amygdala, goes off. It floods the body with stress hormones like cortisol. When this happens day after day, it fundamentally changes how the brain works. It shifts the child from their thinking brain, the cortex, to their survival brain, the brainstem. This directly impairs attention, memory, and executive function, the very skills needed to succeed in school. For autistic children whose nervous systems may already register ordinary things like loud applause or sudden transitions as threats, school becomes less about learning and more about just surviving until the final bell. For kids, belonging is everything. When that need isn't met, the pain is real and can be traumatic. For autistic students, social exclusion often starts subtly, being the last one picked for a team, being ignored during group projects, or being mocked for their passionate interests. These moments pile up, creating relational trauma that erodes a child's trust in their peers and eventually in themselves. This leads to something called camouflaging or masking. It's the exhausting full-time job of trying to hide autistic traits to fit in. While it might reduce bullying in the short term, the psychological cost is immense. It leads to anxiety, depression, and a profound sense of identity confusion. It's a tragic paradox. The more they hide who they are to belong, the more disconnected they feel. The hidden curriculum teaches them that conformity is more valuable than their authentic self. Beyond the social pain, there's sensory trauma, the battle the body fights every single day, the constant hum of electronics, the scrape of chairs on the floor, the unpredictable noise of the hallway. For an autistic student, these can trigger involuntary panic responses. When this happens over and over, the body learns to associate the entire school environment with distress. What makes it worse is when adults dismiss these experiences. Phrases like, "it's not that loud," or "everyone else is fine," are incredibly invalidating. They send a message that your reality is wrong and you are the problem. Over time, the child internalizes this shame, believing they are just too much. This can lead to withdrawal, aggression, or selective mutism, behaviors that are then, once again, misunderstood as defiance instead of a desperate attempt at self-protection. Teachers hold so much power in this equation. A calm, attuned teacher can be a buffer against all this stress, but an unpredictable or punitive one can amplify the trauma. Many educators simply don't get enough training on autism or trauma-informed practices. They see a shutdown or a meltdown and respond with punishment, not support. This not only reinforces the trauma, but destroys trust in authority figures. The legacy of this is often academic anxiety and something called learned helplessness. This is the belief that no matter what you do, failure or punishment is inevitable. It crushes motivation and can last a lifetime, affecting work, relationships, and self-worth. It's when the simple act of reading aloud or turning in homework can trigger a wave of fear. In some cases, it can even lead to school-based PTSD, with nightmares and physical illness at the mere thought of school. So how do we fix this? We have to shift the entire paradigm of education. The traditional model prizes control and compliance. But trauma science tells us that children learn best when they feel safe, not when they feel controlled. We need to move from asking, "What's wrong with you?" to "What happened to you and how can we help?" This is the core of trauma-informed education. It recognizes that behavior is communication. A meltdown isn't defiance, it's a nervous system in distress. This approach aligns perfectly with a neurodiversity-affirming practice, which sees autism as a difference, not a deficit. Together, they give us a blueprint for creating schools that repair trauma instead of causing it. Safety is the foundation. For autistic kids, predictability is safety. Visual schedules, clear transitions, and sensory breaks create a reliable rhythm. A calm adult can also help a child's overwhelmed nervous system regulate. This is called co-regulation. Simple things like speaking slowly, taking deep breaths together, these things send a powerful signal. You are safe here. We also have to reframe behavior. Instead of punishing, we need to get curious. A child having a meltdown is communicating sensory overload. A child refusing to go to school is communicating deep anxiety. Instead of "stop shouting," we could try, "It sounds like you need a break from the noise." Instead of "Why didn't you do your work?" we could ask, "What made it hard to get started today?" This language shifts the dynamic from an authority figure to an ally. And when harm does happen, we need to turn to restorative practices, not punishment. Restorative justice focuses on healing relationships. It views misbehavior as a harm that needs repair, not a rule that was broken. It brings students together to build empathy and understanding, which is far more powerful than exclusion. For this to work, it has to be a systemic change. School leaders need to champion this. That means providing real training for staff, creating flexible policies for accommodations, and getting rid of punitive discipline like restraint and seclusion. It means valuing student well-being as much as test scores. And we can't forget the teachers. They can't pour from an empty cup. Schools need to support their staff's mental health because a regulated teacher is the best tool for creating a regulated classroom. Ultimately, trauma-informed education asks a radical question. What if schools were designed not to control children, but to heal them? For autistic students, the answer begins with honoring their differences. A neurodiversity-affirming classroom values authenticity over assimilation and regulation over compliance. It measures success not just in grades, but in safety, joy, and the return of a child's natural curiosity. The scars of school trauma are a reminder of our collective responsibility to do better. We can transform schools from landscapes of injury into sites of repair. We can create spaces where every child feels safe enough to learn and to be their true, authentic self. Have you ever felt like your body is constantly on high alert? Like the world is just too loud, too bright, too much? For many autistic individuals, this feeling is a daily reality. But what happens when you add trauma into the mix? It's a complex, often misunderstood intersection that we're going to unpack today. Research is showing us more and more that autistic people are at a higher risk of experiencing traumatic stress and developing PTSD. This isn't because autism itself causes trauma. It's because living as an autistic person in a world that often doesn't accommodate, understand, or accept, you can be in itself traumatic. Think about it. Trauma isn't always one big, catastrophic event. For many, it's cumulative. It's the result of repeated micro-injuries to your sense of self-worth and safety. It's the constant strain of bullying, social exclusion, sensory overload, and having your experiences invalidated. It's the daily exhaustion of masking, hiding your true self just to fit in. Over time, this constant state of high alert, of just trying to survive, starts to look a lot like the chronic hypervigilance we see in PTSD. So, how does this actually work in the brain and body? It helps to understand something called the polyvagal theory. Our nervous system has different states. There's the calm, safe, and social state. Then there's the mobilized fight or flight state. And finally, there's the shutdown or freeze state. Autistic individuals often find themselves bouncing between these states very quickly, especially when under sensory or emotional stress. This is remarkably similar to the pattern we see in trauma survivors. When your nervous system can't get back to that feeling of safety, it can get stuck. It might get stuck on, leading to chronic anxiety and vigilance, or it might get stuck off, leading to numbness, detachment, and fatigue. These are core symptoms of PTSD. Neuroimaging studies actually show us that the brains of autistic and traumatized individuals can look similar in some ways. We see things like an overactive amygdala, the brain's alarm system, and reduced activity in the prefrontal cortex, the part that helps us regulate emotions and think logically. In simple terms, this means an autistic brain might interpret an ordinary thing, like a sudden loud noise or a social misunderstanding, as a major threat. It triggers a full-blown physiological stress response. When you add a history of trauma, this sensitivity gets dialed way up. The nervous system can get rewired for chronic vigilance, making you feel like you're in danger even when you're perfectly safe. This is why the intersection of autism and trauma isn't just additive, it's synergistic. They amplify each other, creating a unique and intensified experience of the world. One of the biggest challenges is that trauma in autistic individuals often gets missed or misinterpreted. Traditional PTSD symptoms like flashbacks and avoidance can look different in neurodivergent people. For example, a child who refuses to go to school after being bullied might be labeled with school refusal, instead of being recognized as someone avoiding a traumatic trigger. A teenager who withdraws and stops speaking after a distressing event might be seen as regressing in their autism, not dissociating due to trauma. Even stimming, like hand flapping, rocking, or humming, which is a natural way for autistic people to self-regulate, can be mistaken. It might be seen as just autistic behavior, when it's actually a sign of acute distress, a body trying to cope with overwhelming feelings. Clinicians are now starting to identify what they call an autistic PTSD presentation. These individuals might not talk about nightmares or intrusive memories. Instead, they show their trauma through their bodies. They might have sudden meltdowns, panic attacks, or shutdowns triggered by sensory reminders of the trauma. For them, a flashback might not be a visual memory, but a sensory one, the echo of a specific texture, a sound, or a smell that's linked to the traumatic event. This is crucial because it means that healing has to involve the body and the environment. It can't just be about talking it out. When trauma is stored in the senses, recovery has to start with creating physical and sensory safety. Let's talk about masking. Masking is the conscious or unconscious effort to hide autistic traits to appear more neurotypical. It's a survival strategy, often learned to avoid being bullied or rejected. But this survival comes at a huge cost. It requires constant self-monitoring, suppressing natural self-regulating stims, forcing eye contact, and translating your internal world into a language that others can accept. Over time, this is incredibly exhausting. It can lead to burnout, a sense of losing your own identity, and an increased vulnerability to trauma symptoms. Masking also makes it really hard for others to see that you're struggling. Because you appear calm and high-functioning on the outside, your distress can be completely invisible to friends, family, and even professionals. The collapse, when it inevitably comes, often happens in private. This crash might look like autistic burnout, but it's loaded with the hallmarks of traumatic stress, intense anxiety, insomnia, fear, and intrusive sensory experiences. In this way, masking becomes a painful feedback loop. It's a response to trauma, trying to protect yourself from more harm. But it's also a source of trauma because it disconnects you from your authentic self. This leads us to hyperarousal, which is basically living in a perpetual on state. Many autistic people already experience the world as too intense. When you add a history of trauma, that hypervigilance goes into overdrive. Everyday things that others might not even notice, a ringing phone, a change in plans, the hum of fluorescent lights, can trigger a survival response. Symptoms of this hyper-aroused state can include having a huge startle response, chronic anxiety and muscle tension, digestive issues, difficulty sleeping, and getting stuck in repetitive thought loops after a stressful event. Meltdowns might seem to come out of nowhere, but they're often the result of one micro-stressor too many. These aren't signs of someone not coping well. They are the signs of a nervous system stuck in survival mode. The brain and body are doing exactly what they're designed to do when they feel threatened. The problem is, they've forgotten what it feels like to be safe. Another piece of this puzzle is interoception. That's our eighth sense, the ability to sense our internal bodily states like hunger, thirst, or our own heartbeat. Many autistic individuals have differences in interoception, making it hard to identify the physical feelings of anxiety or fear. A child might just say they feel weird or buzzy, instead of saying they're scared because they can't connect the racing heart with the emotion of panic. This makes self-regulation incredibly difficult. If you can't tell you're becoming overwhelmed, you can't use your coping tools before you reach a crisis point. This is why meltdowns and shutdowns can seem so sudden. They are a form of communication from a body that's overwhelmed and confused, but unable to signal it sooner. Supporting interoception through things like mindfulness or body mapping can be a game changer. It helps reconnect emotion with sensation, empowering individuals to recognize distress signals early. It's also critical to remember that autistic trauma is deeply social and systemic. It's not just about what happens to an individual, it's about the environment they're in. Many autistic people grow up in homes, schools, and workplaces where their needs are ignored, their differences are treated like problems, and their very identity is questioned. This constant invalidation creates a form of relational trauma, a gradual erosion of trust in others and in yourself. Schools, in particular, can be breeding grounds for this. Sensory overload is everywhere, social rules are confusing and unforgiving, and behavior systems often punish autistic traits rather than support autistic needs. Over time, the school environment itself can become a trauma trigger. The very sound of the school bell can trigger a panic response. This is trauma by 1,000 paper cuts, subtle, chronic, and deeply stored in the body. So, how do we break this cycle of misrecognition and pain? We have to start by changing the lens through which we view autism and behavior. Too often, behaviors that are actually rooted in trauma, like avoidance, aggression, or withdrawal, are just dismissed as part of the autism. This is not only inaccurate, but it denies the person the support they desperately need and can even perpetuate the trauma. As clinicians, educators, parents, and friends, we need to learn to ask different questions. Instead of just asking, "Is this autism?" we need to ask, "Could this be trauma?" And most importantly, "Could this be both?" Early recognition and the right kind of support can change everything. When we combine trauma-informed care with neurodiversity-affirming practices, we shift the focus from trying to fix behaviors to creating safety and connection. By doing this, we stop being another source of stress and instead become part of the healing process. Understanding this overlap is the first step toward creating a world that is truly safer and more supportive for autistic individuals. When the storm of autistic burnout or trauma finally passes, what's left behind? Often, it's a quiet landscape of exhaustion, confusion, and raw emotional fragility. Parents I talk to describe this time as walking on eggshells, terrified of saying or doing the wrong thing that might trigger another shutdown. For autistic individuals, it can feel like floating in a fog, detached, disoriented, and maybe even feeling guilty for not being able to function like they used to. First, Let's be clear. This is not regression. It's the body's natural protective response after being flooded with stress for far too long. But for neurodivergent minds, recovery isn't just about getting more sleep. It's about slowly, intentionally rebuilding a world that feels safe, predictable, and trustworthy again. Healing is a process of reconnection with your body, your feelings, your environment, and the people who truly get it. It happens in small, gentle moments that whisper to the nervous system, "You are safe now. You can let your guard down." So, where do we begin? The first and most crucial step is re-establishing safety. And I don't just mean locking the doors. Safety is the felt sense of being secure and accepted without any judgment. For an autistic person, this is built on a few key pillars. First, physical and sensory safety. Think of it like creating a sanctuary. This means calm, predictable spaces. Keep the lighting soft, the background noise low, and the daily routines as consistent as possible. Sudden changes, bright lights, or loud sounds can send anxiety shooting right back up. Give your child control over their sensory world. Let them dim the lights, wear noise-canceling headphones, or retreat to a quiet corner whenever they need to. And please, respect their sensory boundaries. Don't force hugs or eye contact. Always ask for permission before physical touch. Their body, their rules. Next is emotional safety. When your child expresses distress, your response matters more than anything. Instead of saying, "You're fine," try, "That sounds really scary." Validate their feelings. Don't correct them. This is a time to remove all pressure to perform or socialize. Recovery isn't about getting back to normal functioning. It's about rebuilding capacity from the ground up. If they withdraw, see it as a sign of overwhelm, not defiance. Punishment has no place here. Finally, there's relational safety. Be a calm, consistent presence. Your predictability is an anchor for their nervous system. If you lose your patience and raise your voice, because we're all human, repair it. A simple, genuine apology can rebuild trust faster than anything else. When you model your own self-regulation, you are co-regulating with them, showing them that big feelings can be managed. Without this foundation of safety, no other strategy will work. Once safety is established, we move to step 2, deep rest and recovery. After burnout, autistic individuals need far more downtime than our busy world usually allows. Their nervous systems have been running a marathon of hyperarousal. It's time to let them rest. First, normalize rest. Rest is not laziness. It's a biological necessity. Encourage downtime without a hint of guilt. Create a sensory-friendly rest zone with weighted blankets, dim lights, and soothing music. Next, reduce demands. Temporarily scale back expectations for schoolwork, chores, and social events. The focus is on stabilization, not productivity. This low-demand approach prevents re-traumatization and allows their own intrinsic motivation to slowly return. Then, reconnect through simple, predictable routines. A visual schedule can be a lifesaver, helping them anticipate what's next and reducing the anxiety of uncertainty. And when it's time to re-engage with the world, do it slowly. A gradual return to school or therapy, with their choice and consent at every step, is key to preventing their nervous system from getting overwhelmed all over again. Step 3 is about rebuilding the bridge between mind and body. Trauma and burnout can sever this connection. Many autistic people experience alexithymia, which is a difficulty identifying emotions, and interoceptive confusion, where it's hard to interpret what your body is telling you. You can help reconnect them to their body with tools like visual emotion charts or color-coded zones of regulation. Help them link physical sensations to feelings. For example, your heart is beating fast. Maybe that means you're feeling nervous. You can also do daily body check-ins, asking simple questions like, is your body feeling tight or loose right now? Warm or cold? Labeling emotions out loud is also incredibly powerful. When you say, "I'm feeling a little frustrated, so I'm going to take a few deep breaths," you're modeling that all emotions are safe, nameable, and manageable. This co-regulation is how children learn emotional literacy. Visual supports like emoji cards or even tactile tools like weighted lap pads can also help them express themselves and tune into their internal world. As stability returns, the focus shifts from just surviving to truly growing. This is where healing transforms into a deeper self-understanding and empowerment. Post-traumatic growth for autistic people often looks different. It's quieter, more introspective, and deeply connected to living an authentic life. A huge part of this is reclaiming one's identity. Many autistic people spend years masking, suppressing their natural traits to fit in. This is exhausting and can lead to a profound loss of self. Healing involves unmasking and rediscovering what feels genuine and joyful. As a parent or educator, you can support this by using affirming language, like autistic person if they prefer it. Validate their unique ways of communicating and help them connect with the autistic community, where they can find role models and a sense of belonging. From here, we build resilience. But for autistic individuals, resilience isn't about being tough. It comes from predictable environments and a sense of control over their own lives. Maintain those consistent routines. Give them meaningful choices throughout the day, no matter how small. Do you want to use the blue cup or the red one? Would you like quiet time now or in 10 minutes? Every choice you offer helps restore their sense of agency, which trauma so often takes away. The language we use also has a massive impact. Let's replace harmful, pathologizing phrases with trauma-informed alternatives. Instead of non-compliant, say they're experiencing distress. Instead of attention-seeking, say they're seeking connection. This shift in language changes everything. It reframes behavior as communication and restores dignity. As one autistic student shared, healing began the day a teacher asked, "What helps you feel safe?" No one had ever asked that before. And finally, to the caregivers, you cannot pour from an empty cup. Supporting a trauma survivor is emotionally exhausting. This is called vicarious trauma, and it's real. Please acknowledge your own limits and seek support. Your healing is part of your child's healing. When you model self-care, you teach them that rest and regulation are lifelong, essential practices. Healing from autistic burnout and trauma isn't about erasing the past. It's about integrating it into a new, more compassionate story. It's about shifting our perspective from "what's wrong with you" to "what happened to you, and how can I help you feel safe?" When we create environments of safety, respect, autonomy, and connection, we don't just help autistic individuals survive. We create a world where they can truly, authentically thrive. Thank you so much for watching. If this resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe for more content on neurodiversity affirming support. Take care.